Welcome back to Island View on Eastlink Community TV. I'm Matt Beardsley. Glad you could join us tonight for our first show of the new year 2019 as we continue our discussion with the Premier PEI Wade MacLauchlan, looking back on the news and politics of 2018. There's no question that the number one news topic in 2018 and continues to be news was the issue around affordable housing on PEI, particularly in the major centres, Summerside and Charlottetown. As we tape this interview, the vacancy rate right now in Charlottetown is at 0.3%. It was 1.2 at the same time in 2017. For 3 or more bedroom properties, the vacancy rate is 0. The average rent for 2-bedroom apartments is now up from $852 to $903. And we have seen from 2016 in Charlottetown, the vacancy rate at 1.7, as I mentioned, now down to almost 0 as we speak. When did you sort of first become aware that maybe, I don't want to say we have an issue, but this is becoming a concern for a lot of residents?
I think, Matt, if you go back and replay our interview from this time last year, I said that the two issues for 2018 would be housing and workforce, and they go together. So over the past 2 years, we've created 7,000 new full-time jobs in our province. That's putting the kind of pressure that you're talking about and that we know about in terms of the matching up the demand and the supply of housing. So it's a supply issue, and it's one that definitely requires leadership and commitment and resources from the province. It requires activity in the private sector. It requires participation of other levels of government and also the not-for-profit sector. And that's all happening right now in a very dynamic way, and I'm proud to say that that's the case. It takes a while, of course, in housing.
You released your housing action plan recently, committing to 1,000 new units over 4 years, 175 in the next fiscal year. One of the things you announced was 100 new units in Charlottetown and 75 in surrounding communities. The latest information I have, I think, as of November, was that RFPs had gone out for this development. Where do we stand right now on this?
Oh, you can see some of it actually taking place on coming in the St. Peter's Road on the right-hand side. Some seniors housing that's under construction there. You'll see, in fact, I encourage Islanders to stay tuned on this. Over the next weeks, there are a number of pieces that are already well in hand in terms of commitments, different parties involved to actually respond on the affordable housing side. And here's the piece that is perhaps not seen so much, but it's a great example of how government can do things and actually go to where people are. Back in the spring, when we unveiled this in our budget and then in our housing action plan, we had 275 what are called rent sups or rent supplements for people who qualify according to certain criteria. Today we have 609. That's to say we've more than doubled, in fact increased by about 120%. The number of people in Prince Edward Island who stay where they're living but get the rent supplement. So this is a multifaceted initiative. It requires some construction, it requires some financing, it requires some changes, for example, in municipal bylaws, and it's something where a lot of different players are involved. And I'd say with real clarity on this, that there's more going on, and there's more going on in terms of government policy and resources in affordable housing in Prince Edward Island, or social housing in Prince Edward Island today, than has been the case since the 1980s.
One of the topics that comes up a lot when talked about this is the Airbnb phenomenon, where people, short-term vacation rentals, some properties now will rent sort of spring till summer and then rent over the summer in the effort to make more money, and people have every right to do that by all means. One of the things you also announced in terms of the housing action program was to take a scan of short-term vacation rentals to see their impact on the housing market, what other jurisdictions had taken in to manage their impact. When will we see some news on that front from the government's point of view?
There's a very active review going on to see what we can learn in terms of best practices from other jurisdictions. And it reminds me, when you asked this question, Matt, that in the spring of last year in the legislature, we had a motion on the floor about housing, and I mentioned the vacation rentals as one of the challenges on the supply side. And the opposition openly scoffed at me and even went to town on social media saying, well, that just showed how out of touch I was. So this is something that's come on very quickly in terms of its scale. It is a factor in terms of the available supply of housing. It's also a factor in terms of responding to the growth in tourism in the province. So it's one of those cases where government can't just kind of wake up on a Friday morning and say, we're going to flip the switch from here to here, and this will be the new reality. You have to take a real measure of what the impact can be in a number of different sectors, and make sure that what we do helps the situation.
Another thing you talked about was working together with municipalities who are responsible for zoning and regulations to better support housing development and capacity in all regions of the island. We've seen some issues between developers and City Council here in Charlottetown in terms of getting things approved and some bylaws around parking, things of that nature. What kind of conversations are you having with the municipalities to maybe, I can't say push them in the right direction, but maybe, discussions about how you might be better able to support them in changing some of their regulations?
It can be regulation. It could also be how municipalities can contribute in terms of, for example, tax approach, and perhaps even a tax holiday for developers who want to put in place social or affordable housing. So there are currently initiatives, and it's all in the public space, and it will become more so, from West Prince to Three Rivers, where councils are looking actively at projects that will make a difference in terms of supply, that will make a difference in terms of affordability, and that are going to allow their communities to grow in a dynamic way, because it's our population that's growing and growing in all parts of the province that's really behind this.
Last question for this particular show. We'll have part 2 next week. There seems to be a demand, obviously, looking at it from 10,000 feet, okay, we need construction, we need skilled workers. There seems to be a gap there. Obviously, not everybody wants to move into that industry, but perhaps what is the government doing to support a young man or young woman who might want to take advantage of this boom right now in all the areas, surrounding this sort of issue?
And let me link your question to the previous discussion about affordable housing, because on the private economy side, or the private sector side of residential construction, we have an absolute boom. It's about 100% increase over the last 2 years in terms of the annual activity. So there is absolutely a need for skilled workers, for laborers, for people to do all kinds of jobs. We've seen an increase of somewhere on the order of 800 to 1,000 people who are in construction, who are actively working. We have programs that, together with the Construction Association, to encourage young people. We have programs with the Women's Network to get more women into the trades through a program called Trade Horizons. We've got various programs, including transportation. We've got childcare, and actually childcare is one of the issues in terms of people getting to the workforce. And maybe Matt, I just don't want to take too much of your time.
Yeah, I need to wrap up.
I have to finish. We have the highest labor participation rate in Prince Edward Island, east of Manitoba, and that's something that we're very proud of.
All right, we'll continue our conversation with the Premier of PEI, Wade MacLauchlan, next week, and we'll take a look ahead to what might be in store for politics in 2019. For the rest of the crew, I'm Matt Beardsley. Thanks for watching Island View on Eastlink Community TV. We'll see you next Tuesday at 7 o'clock.